Hey there, listeners. A quick new update for you that I promise is going to be shorter than the last one. First off, Patreon members at $5 a month or higher will be able to listen to ad-free episodes starting at episode 100 and going forward for basically as long as this podcast keeps going. You can listen either in the Patreon app or through Spotify, where you can get an exclusive RSS feed available only to Patreon members. This is one of the easiest ways to support the podcast for just $5 a month, and I hope you enjoy your ad-free experience. Second, those single barrels are almost here. The Barrel Rye, finished in Armagnac and picked with This Is My Bourbon Podcast, and the 2 Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof Ryes are on their way. Patreon members will have exclusive discounts and prime access. Even $1 a month means you'll have a few hours more to get those bottles before they're released to the public. Last thing, there are now 2 spots available in the monthly Bottle Share Club available to patrons at the $25 a month tier. If you're interested, I wouldn't hesitate. I expect the spot to go quickly. If it looks like it's all filled up and you're still interested, shoot me an email and we'll see if we can open up just one more spot. With that, thanks everyone, and enjoy this episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to an episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today, we're also taking a little deviation from the whiskey route. We've been doing that a bunch lately, and I've been quite enjoying it. Today, we're going to be talking about a new country, a new type of spirit that defies categorization, and something really fun that I got to try a couple weeks ago. We'll get into that all in a little bit. So, to talk about Trä-Kál Patagonian Spirit from Patagonia. It's the southmost area of South America. So it is literally the tip of the world if you're going around that direction. And to talk all about it, we have on Sebastian Gomez, Camarino. Welcome on.
Thank you, David. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great, great. And hello, everybody out there in podcast world.
So, yes, we are talking. This is a spirit that, like I said, it really kind of defies categorization. You say so on the website, and I think it's very accurate. Something that's kind of between a gin and a brandy, and with elements of cordial and a lot of different things going on. But before we get to the spirit itself, which is just interesting in itself, I want to just ask you a little bit more about your backstory, like how you got to the point where you could start Trä-Kál.
Well, people that know me have funny opinions of me. Funny, peculiar, not funny, haha, in the sense that my family sort of left Argentina when we were very young. And through my father and my mother's lives and careers, we moved and lived in different countries. I went to like 4 different high schools. So kind of like a military family without being a military family. We were very independent. It was my younger brother and I. And we lived across South America and Europe, mostly in the UK, became British citizens. But then I actually started my professional career in the US and continued moving. I started Trä-Kál because of an idea, an observation I had. I couldn't shake this notion. I was working for a Diageo at the time, and I was in a commercial role. I wasn't in the productive side at all, but I really enjoyed the whiskey tours and the wineries and the brew houses and stuff of all the brands that they have. And but apart from sort of nerding out on that, I was sort of looking at the history of booze in a weird way, context, trying to find context. I'd go to a bar, and to me, it's like a compendium, like an encyclopedia of humanity's endeavor. I mean, without putting too much of a shine to it, because the booze business is the booze business, but it's also very interesting in the sense that you could argue it's the oldest technology continually used. From agriculture came distillation. Wars and histories and kingdoms and empires, their fortunes were largely determined in their trade, and a lot of it was, associated with alcohol production. Culturally and historically, so many factors involved. And I noticed that the brands in this back bar, they were the survivor brands of the geographical and historical history. Well, historical history, that's but sort of like the trajectory of this human sort of activity. It was, in Spanish we say alambique for a still. Alambic comes from the Moor, from the Arab, Persian. And it's because they were, during the Middle Ages, were the only ones that were really trading in books and writing things down. The Vikings, I guess, must have stolen one or two of their books from one of their many raids, and it got into the hands of Celtic priests, Christian priests in Ireland. And someone said, "Oh, instead of making perfume, we can make a beverage." Hence, we had our first distilled grain spirits in Northern Europe. Things like that fascinate me. And you could argue that there's like a tree of evolution in life for brands and products, and you can say that spirits became gins, and they branched out into aquavits, and brandies are the mother category. But then you had grain distillates and malted grain distillates, and they became whiskeys and Irish whiskeys, and then bourbons, and then liqueurs, etc., etc., etc. We don't need to revisit all of that. But my observation was, how come no one's done anything in Patagonia? Because the one thing that's consistent with all of these stories is that some fool went to a part of the world and simply tried to make the best hooch they could with what was down there. And I couldn't understand, knowing this part of the world and all its attributes, why no one had tried this. Not to make a gin or an aquavit or a schnapps or whatever, because there's been German colonizers here and Europeans come through here and stuff. And some crazy uncle or grandfather did make a pear schnapps or a Kiesfasse down here. But it was for personal consumption, and they were never really absorbed as part of the local identity. They never materialized into that. So if you're listening to me and you haven't switched off already, you probably figured out that I'm quite a fantasioso guy. I sort of I do these mental exercises, and I thought, well, why don't we do the same? Or at least why don't I do the same? Because by then I was doing it all by myself, and no one was crazy enough to go on this journey or start this journey with me. And it was like, why don't we put a pot where there's good water, really interesting ingredients, an identity that's totally unique in itself, and let's see what we can make down there. I was always attracted to this place, and kind of selfishly, it was like I was about to turn 40 years old, and I thought this would be a great lifestyle for me. If I were to say with my life, what am I going to do for the next 25 years, like before I put my boots up, I'll do what I want where I want. And it sounded fantastic to have a distillery in Patagonia, even if I was the only fool making booze. It was just, I needed to get it out of my system. And that's why I said that. This is how I stumbled upon it. I couldn't shake the idea off. It started in about 2011. And by 2016, I already moved down there. I'd already done some testing and stuff, and moved down here because I'm here now. I'm a resident in Chile, and we have the distillery in La Región de los Lagos, the lake region in northern Patagonia. And the brand started out in 2017, and here we are.
And I mean, it's worth noting that, again, it's the first time we've been to, I think it's the first time we've been to South America, period, let alone to Chile or Argentina or Patagonia. But it's also worth noting that obviously it's a whiskey focused podcast usually, and we think of like the whiskey big five: US, Canada, Japan, Scotland, Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, for the global South, which is enjoying more and more representation in food and culture and beverage and history, there's still a lot of catching up to do. And while a lot of people look at the global South, I immediately think of Africa, India, southern parts of Asia as well. South America, I think, doesn't quite get the attention it deserves there because of all the cultures that are still there, and also because, frankly, it's. I hate to put it this way, and I hope listeners will understand why what I'm saying in this way, but because the populations that have come down to us through the years in Central and South America, I'm really having trouble with my words today, and I haven't had anything to drink. The populations that have come down to us are heavily, European influenced. They're the names are many of the names are European. Or at least influence and such. So whether it was British, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, German, and it's come down to us that way, where for whatever reason, I feel like that's part of why the global South in South America doesn't get the same attention as, let's say, India or Africa, where the Which cultures are quite different.
Itself, yes, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Exactly, but for the global South, really, if you take out India in terms of spirits production, if you take out India, then it's wildly underrepresented. And yes, I know India's got the best-selling rum, it's got the best-selling whiskey in the world, but that's right. The Philippines has the best-selling rum. India has the best-selling whiskey. Eric from Holmes Key is going to kill me for not remembering the Philippines has the best-selling rum because he told me that.
So I'm here for
that. Yeah. So, say it's a uniquely Patagonian spirit. This is, yes. And I guess before we get into the name and how you got around to it, let's just describe it. I think it's something that deserves a little description when you haven't had it.
Well, yeah. Just to address your point about underrepresentation, it just like this part of the world doesn't export itself maybe like other cultures have or haven't. I think a lot of what you said is absolutely, I'd say it's probably about 90% of the reason. That we're probably more similar to each other within the Americas. We like our booze down here in significant volumes. Brazil with its cachaça, Colombia with its aguardiente, the rums and brown spirits and whiskeys that are consumed in Venezuela, piragua, which is like a moonshine from Paraguay, Chile and Peru with their piscos. Argentina has the most European consumption. They like their liqueurs and their amari and have a lot of their own innovation that you probably don't expect unless you go down there. It's really quite fantastic. And in the US, more about the agave from Mexico and Central America. But in Central America, you have the white cane guaro, which is very similar to the piragua and the cachaça, and it's drunk in copious quantities and stuff, and it's very much a part of the national identity. I think the cocktail scene has a lot to do with it too. The way it's consumed and the versatility of these particular things. The preparation of the cachaça is basically the caipirinha for the rest of the world. The aguardiente is drunk straight. All of these things kind of make them perceived as one-trick ponies, although they're incredibly sophisticated and there's so much to learn. If you wind back the clock 20, 25 years, David, think about how tequila was consumed. No one knew about sotol and mezcal and bocanora and all these things. And
It was for
everyone thought
shooting.
it was a shot, and it was how do you want your margarita, frozen or on the rocks? That was kind of, and until someone started scratching away at the surface. And believe me, I've been to over 60 countries with this business, and I chose one where I wanted to do my own thing. But believe me when I say I've been around and I've seen, especially in South America, the versatility and the diversity of the hooch that's made. I just wanted to address that because I think
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone who's passionate about this just needs to take a walk south. It'll be fun. What you'll discover. On the on what it is. How much? Why don't I flip the tortilla and ask you? What was your first perception when you tried Trä-Kál? What did you think?
So to give a little context, I got to try it at the Indie Spirits Expo in New York. This was a couple months ago now, but and I think it was my second taste of the evening. The first being a high proof balcones. So I had not balcones, sorry, a high proof Garrison Brothers. So I was like, that doesn't sound right to me. So my palate was warmed up, let's say, and I went over, and it was still very early. There were not a lot of people there yet, and I got talking to a representative there, Jenna, who said, I said, I've never seen this liquor before. I've never seen the brand, from Patagonia. Like, nothing was ringing a bell for me. And she said, do you like gins? I said, yes. Do you like the Coors? Mm-hmm. And do you like, what was the third guy? Oh, the brandy. Do you like a brandy? I said, honestly, yeah, I like all three of those things. And she said, good. Well, I think you're going to like this. She poured me a little bit. And she said, it's kind of a baby between brandy and gin. It's made off of the fruit base, but kind of in a gin style with the botanical, and all of that just went right into the flavor profile. So I got a lot of fresh berry notes. Was the first thing that hit. Also an immediate, really nice mouthfeel. Like, this is at 42%, 84 proof. So it's not a high proof spirit necessarily, but it drinks like it drank like a liqueur, like a thicker amaro, without being too heavy. But I do like things with a big mouthfeel. So
it's important to say
yeah.
to our people who haven't tried it that are listening in, it's totally clear and transparent. There's
Oh,
no
yes.
sugar. There's no sugar
Yeah.
in it. It comes out of the this. It's a spirit. It's not a liqueur. It's a liquor,
Right.
but not a liqueur.
Right. Exactly. Um, so yeah, the first thing was just the berries, and then kind of apples or orchard fruit. There you go. Showing the bottle right now, and then afterwards was more of an herbal thing, like a little bit of mint took over, some kind of a. I'm trying to think of the kind of leaf, like a shiso leaf kind of thing. I know it's more Japanese, but that's just the way that my brain went there. Didn't become herbal like you think of, again, an amaro, where it's super, like, this was a 1 point meant to be medicine kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it was really lovely, and I tried two different batches of it, both great. One had more of a licorice forward note to it. One was a little more on the berry side to it. So, front versus back palate for me, but both were really delicious. And again, it was like, I don't know what this is. This is something totally new. And to that point, it doesn't fit in any categories. So it may sound like you're dancing around the categories of his brandy, gin. It's because it doesn't fit into any of those. So flipping the tortilla back to you. Now it is your turn.
Yeah, so I understand. Listen, I can tell that you've been around the block. That's pretty much spot on description of what it is. And let me tell you why it's this way. My intention was to try to make the most representative and authentic spirit I could in this part of the world. I had no idea if it was going to be any good, because mostly that's down to the distiller and the technique. Okay, you can make great whiskeys and bad whiskeys in the best place in the world. It's the distiller has a lot to do with that too. But I didn't go down there. I didn't come here with a recipe. What I was trying to do is, like I said, be authentic and representative. So I only use ingredients which are 100 kilometers around where we opened our distillery, where we have our source. We have our water source below us. And I tried to make the spirit Patagonia in a bottle. My interpretation of what it's like to be down there or be here. I think we've achieved that in as much as we've had visitors come down here and we go for hikes in the backwoods. And if anyone listening, if you Google Trä-Kál, Trakal, and you'll see the story of the Patagonian Spirit on YouTube, and also go to our website and there's links and everything. You'll see that right behind our distillery, it's wild. There's lakes and then the Andes and the volcanoes. And this is where all these native ingredients are. And we've had guests and people come here from the US or Europe, other parts of the world, and we go for a trek or whatever. So, oh my God, this place smells like Trä-Kál. And I go, nope. I'm flipping the tortilla again. Trä-Kál smells like this place. That's the key. I want you to open the bottle and get the air and the aromas and those unique herbs and fruits and berries that are in Trä-Kál. We moved the distillery to the ingredients. We didn't take the ingredients to a distillery. And we spent 3 years beating metal and copper, steel and copper, to design and build our equipment specifically for Trä-Kál. There's 3 types of pots, one for each distillation. We have 5 pots in total right now. So we have 2, 1, and 2, but there's 3 distinct types, which we designed and built ourselves to make Trä-Kál for each one of the stages of the distillation. The first is to extract the alcohol from the fruit concentrate. The second is to prepare the alcohol with berries, which are all native and local, which include a lot of glycerin. So we produce our own sort of glycerol. That goes into a final distillation in a very peculiar pot, because it's all copper, there's no plates, and has an agitator with a big spoon, and which mixes everything up and distills everything very slowly. And we infuse at temperature essential oils, which we produce year round from 7 native herbs. If you didn't do any of that, you didn't do the second distillation to prepare the alcohol from the first distillation, which is the only alcohol we produce. And if you didn't use that design, you wouldn't achieve a clear liquid that behaves like any liquid. See how there's no beating? It just completely becomes clear. To the mouth, it's smooth, but it's untuoso, as we say. It's rich, but there's no residual sugar. It's a micro dosing of these essential oils. It's actually less than in perfumes. Okay, but this process of a canvas of fruits, which are naturally sweet and smooth and rounded base alcohols, nets this result that is Trä-Kál. I didn't come up with this, but I think it's a really good visual. The 3 distillations is like painting a picture. You need a canvas, and that's our fruits. We ferment and distill those fruits. Then we give the picture form by giving the alcohol body, and then we do the detail with the essential oils in the third distillation. That's how you paint your picture. If you didn't give a form, the details would be inconsistent. Even so, and this is one of the most special things about Trä-Kál, all of our fruit is foraged. All of our herbs are foraged. I don't call Mr. Del Monte and say, hey, sir, give me 1,400 cases of Granny Smiths. There is no agriculture where we are. Just look at those videos. You'll see that the water is pretty much impeccable, which is the reason I went down first. It's the water. It's the number one ingredient the distiller needs to have great product. So there's no nitrates in the water table. The water is all subterranean, so there's no environmental pollution. Not that there's much here anyway. And what happens is we create a spirit which we sort of threw the categories out the window. There's nothing in our distillery which we purchase from a catalog or an industry supply. Not to say that we wouldn't, but since we moved the distilleries to a part of the world where there wasn't any of that, we had to build it ourselves. It made more sense to build it ourselves. And everything's custom. Even our bottling lines are custom. So it's a pretty ludicrous proposition, Trä-Kál. It's okay, because I'm not talking down about anyone. You hear a lot about it in the industry, in the marketing. This is what makes our product special: the techniques, the master distiller, the ingredients, this and the other. Ours, we're not saying we're better or worse, because there's no benchmark. We're just what we are. We're pretty much ourselves. We're a category unto one, and this legally has been recognized by the TTB in the US, by the Europeans, and by the Chileans, the SAG, which is the equivalent of the TTB FDA here in Chile. We have our own description on the bottle. It doesn't say gin, pisco, whiskey, vodka, eau de vie, brandy. It's Patagonian Spirit. And that's the actual legal description. It's really interesting because for me personally, my journey, this is my first spirit. Now I'm working and I've been developing other cool stuff. See that? That's got a different color, right? Okay. There are so many interesting flavor profiles here. It's like a palette. It's like a bartender or an enthusiast or a journalist or whatever. They say, what the hell is this? This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to sort of wake you up into this sort of whole world that is Patagonia. When you come to Patagonia, even if you're not in the booze business or whatever, people, I've hiked with people and walked around and shown them around and stuff like that. Oh, this reminds me of the Pyrenees, or it reminds me of the Alps, or it reminds me of like the Peshawar Valley in Pakistan, or it reminds me of the Rockies or whatever. Except it doesn't. Because then you're going to see a condor, then you're going to see a puma, then you're going to see these trees, which are completely unique. And then you're going to smell ulmo honey it's the most delicious honey. Okay. All of these things, it's just like a little bit of a parallel universe. It's not the same. Just on our bottle, you see our bottle design? I don't know if you can see it because of the light here, guys and girls. That's Chile.
I'll be including pictures for any audio listeners.
Well, this isn't all of Chile. Chile actually goes up to a little bit above here. This is just like the southern 65% of the country, and we're right in the middle, because that's the point. We had to be right in the middle of the bottle. Just here, there are 91 active volcanoes. This is the newest land on Earth. This is the ultimate testing ground for flavor on the planet. All of these are like from where we are, a little bit north and then further south. These are all kind of fjords. There's no road from where we are to the bottom of the continent. If you want to go to the cities down on the bottom, you either take a boat, a plane, or you cross the Andes and you go down the road on the flat pampas on the Argentine side. Each one of these valleys or fjords has different sunlight. The sun's coming out from over the east, so they actually get less sunlight because they have to climb over 4,000 or 5,000 meters worth of Andes. Think about that for a second. Okay, sunrise is 20 minutes later than everywhere else. Okay. You have all of the Pacific moisture coming in. So if you're from California and the Pacific Northwest, you know about marine layers and moisture coming in. Okay. And throw that into the mix, all the volcanic activity and the tectonic activity, which changes the pH of the soil. So this is the youngest land on Earth. Okay. Yet it's also one of the most diverse. Think about it for a second. The United Nations confirmed through an investigation that southern Chile and Argentina actually capture more carbon than the Amazon. We have these temperate rainforests here. We have ice fields. We have marine coastlines, which are just impenetrable vegetation. It's amazing what this part of the world has. And that generates small varieties in herbs and in berries and in fruits. All of the fruit that we have, if you look at some of the videos, you'll see they're from people's homes. They're running wild. If we could turn the clock back, imagine what North America was like. Now there's parts of Michigan and Minnesota and the Pacific Northwest and upstate New York where there are still fruit trees. But imagine the whole continent covered in fruit trees like it used to be, right? This is what we still have in this part of Patagonia. So anything that falls off the tree that the pigs don't eat, they go in my pots. Apples, pears, quince, crabapple. For me, it's just like what great granddad would have done a couple of 100 years ago. Like I said, that was the mental exercise. You know, what are we going to use? I'm not going to make a gin. I'm not going to import juniper berries and grains. There's none of that. I'm going to work with what's on the land. And that's the story. Beating a lot of metal, scratching your head. And I think the final ingredient, I think probably the most important ingredient, was to be humble and to listen to the local people. I spent about 9 months backpacking. I got to know the local communities here, the Huiche people. Huiche mean Che's people. Huiche means people from the southern coast. It's a matriarchal society. So the chieftainess called the Maki. She I guess she read that I was being respectful and humble about it and what I was wanting to do. And she taught me a lot about the herbs and the histories and the medicinal properties of all of the things that they use and their mythology and their values and their culture. And it's so immersive. It's like we feel very, very proud to be part of this story. Okay. And that alcohol has that. Think about it. And this is why I'm passionate about alcohol brands. They encompass so much about an identity of a place and a history of a place and the unique characteristic of a place. I challenge anyone to think of another consumer product that has that sophistication and that depth and that sincerity about what they are. When the brands are sincere, okay, something like a Macallan's or a Johnny Walker or a Barbancourt rum from Haiti or a Japanese whiskey, or in terms of the sincerity of those traditions. Pisco is from the 16th century in Peru. I mean, Alabas and those brands, literally, they're still making it with the same pots that the Spanish conquistadores built when they were there because they couldn't make wine. The grapes were no good for wine, but let's make an orujo and then we'll call it pisco after the market town. That's just amazing to me. That's like anthropological heritage. And I think when you understand that, I think you actually get like a little bit of extra pleasure out of your glass.
This month's Impact Spotlight is on a new whiskey from Adelphi, McLean's Nose, a new blended Scotch whiskey expertly crafted to have a West Coast character with both a high malt content at 70% and a high proportion of ex-sherry casks. McLean's Nose is both a nod to Ardnamurchan's rugged Western Peninsula home with its beautiful landmark on the south coast of the peninsula, and as an homage to the long mentorship they've received from Mr. Charles McLean. McLean is an undisputed legend, affectionately referred to as the Chief Nose, since 1993 when the Adelphi name was revived as an independent bottler by Jamie Walker. Bottled at a super approachable 46% ABV, this is the perfect dram to sip while reading one of Charlie's acclaimed books. At an even more approachable $35 a bottle, this is a must-buy, especially for those of us who, much as we must love bourbon, are going to be fully bourboned out by the end of this month. Join me in the dram and look for McLean's Nose in your favorite whiskey shop near you. The Whiskey Ring podcast is proudly sponsored by Impex Beverages. For sure, and there were two examples, one recent and one that was the very first episode we ever did, that I wanted to bring up as kind of a, not a side-to-side comparison, but something to think about. So the more recent one, which may be the episode before this, maybe two back, we'll see how they come out, but I was talking with Eddie Brooke, who is in Australia, on the far east coast of Australia by Cape Byron, does Cape Byron Distillery. Yeah. And they put out a great gin, helped out by Jim McEwen, well known to anyone who has worked at Diageo and at other brands like that, for sure.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they focused on was that you had to, aside from the juniper, which had to be brought in because it doesn't grow in that area. Hello.
Georgie, by the way.
Yeah.
This is home. Sorry.
It's okay.
This is my boy, Georgie.
Aside from the juniper, everything is most things are from that area. I think 17 of the 25 botanicals are native to the land, very close by. And
wouldn't use them.
Right, exactly. And because
our grandparents did when they were making their things, and those evolved and survived and thrived through competition, through bankruptcy, through divorces and murders and wars and rebellions, and they worked it out and they got through. And I think, why wouldn't they? I think it's really fantastic that people use the local stuff, tell their story.
And so that was the one part of it, because there are most of the botanicals are stuff that we're just not familiar with in the US, and I guess Australia is technically, I don't know if Australia is considered Western or Eastern, I don't know, but we're not familiar with it.
My brother been there many times. My brother's been there for over 20 years. It's a fascinating place because it is in a process of transition. Okay. Mm-hmm. And Asia is changing the character of Australia. So I think Australia now is its own thing. It took them 300 years for them to figure themselves out.
So, that was the first one that came to me. And then the other one was from our very first episode, which was with Old Time Spirits. It's a place, very small place up in the Pacific Northwest. Will Persons. He was my guinea pig, and always thank him for it. And he has an Irish background. His roots go to Ireland way, way back, hundreds of years. And he wanted to make a spirit that was Irish whiskey, but made with an apple base. And he was telling the story, and keep in mind, this is 2.5 years ago. I knew very, very little about the industry. I was still learning all the categories. I was learning the terminology, and he was describing how we needed to get or he needed to get rather, a special certification because he wanted to call it
A
Irish whiskey, but
dispensation, as we
obviously,
call them.
right, dispensation. Because as as a fruit base on its face, you'd have to call it a brandy in the
Brandy.
US or in most places, I would say. But because he was able to show the historical record, to your point, the anthropological histories of these things, that at a certain point in Ireland, you were making Irish whiskey with an apple base and calling
Mm-hmm.
it Irish whiskey, that it was valid, and he got the dispensation for it. And I keep thinking to myself, that was the first episode, and that's such a cool, weird fact to come out of it. And I think that goes to
Isn't human
the idea.
activity so amazing, diverse, and
Yeah.
sometimes trying to understand it, we invent these boxes and these orthodoxies and the categories and stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, human activity is more like this nut job here. It's more haphazard and playful and clueless and clumsy, like I described Georgie to be. And that's actually how these accidents happen. When I came down here, I kind of discovered for myself the whole culture here with chicha. Chicha is a very interesting thing because chicha is an Aymara, Mapuche word. All of the sort of Pacific-sided South American indigenous cultures, they share that word. And basically it's interpreted to being alcoholic juice, like from fruit. In the Caguan, Darien region of Colombia and Panama, they make it out of tropical fruits because that's what they have. They ferment those out. In Central Pacific, South America, Peru and Bolivia, people know about chicha because it's made from corn. And it's famous because they ferment it because they spit into it. So that's kind of like one of their, its notorieties. Okay. Right. But in the South, we call it chicha when it's made from apples and pears. Okay, we use the same word. So with at Trä-Kál, we don't distill chicha. We use the same fruit that they use because it's just the fruit that they have. Chicha requires fermentation of many months, and it's usually buried, so it oxidizes. So it's very dark, kind of flat. It's like a failed cider in the sense that there's no carbonation. But it's depending on the fruit, it can be very sweet and delicious. And I thought, here we go. Let's use this fruit.
Yeah.
We don't oxidize it. We just make the juice, fermented, and in a few days, as soon as we can get the fermentation process to finish and get as much of the alcohol as we can, usually just above 5%, and that's what we distill in the first distillation.
And if anyone, by the way, just because there's going to be someone who catches this, and I got to bring it up. If anyone heard that they, in one particular version of chicha, they spit into it to help the fermentation, and you think, oh, well, I'm never going to try that. I challenge you with this. If you've ever been on a distillery tour and stuck your finger in the malt or the wash, where has your finger been? And they still let that go forward. So distillation cleans and fixes a lot of things. So don't knock it till you try it. It'll be fine. Because I trust.
Yeah.
I don't trust.
Agree with you more.
Yeah.
Listen, I couldn't agree with you more, especially since the fact that it initiates a process which is a closed loop. And by producing alcohol, it actually sanitizes it.
Right.
All right. The process ends when it can't produce any more alcohol. So
exactly.
You couldn't get it cleaner. Guys, for anyone who's a bit squeamish about booze, let me tell you something. Think about it. And those out there who are nerds about booze like I am and the history of booze, they probably figured out that up until Napoleonic times, when Mr. Napoleon was sick and tired of how stinky Paris was and how sick and full of dysentery and all sorts of infectious conditions his troops were, when he basically said, you know what? Let's move the tanneries out of Paris and let's put sewage and clean water flowing through the city. No one in the world, unless they were going to a stream or a waterfall or what we call a vertiente, which is like a spring. No one was drinking the fresh water because it could kill you. Okay. So every historical figure, right up until some of them still held on, like Winston Churchill, but just about every important historical figure was pretty sauced up from an early age,
Thousands
because
of years we
fermentation was the
drank
only
wine and
way,
beer instead.
yeah, meads and ales and all sorts of things, because it was the only safe way to drink. So I throw that out there because sometimes when we get sophisticated and we get super nerdy, and we also tend to fall into the trap of becoming a little squeamish about this, about the human existence. Trying new things, trying street food, and as you travel, or like a chicha or this like that. I'm not saying you do it every day, but it gives you a context of how we've survived and evolved to get these exquisite brands and products. They all came out of very humble beginnings. Very humble beginnings. Don't forget, juniper was put in pre-Napoleonic times to their hooch because it was the only way that the Dutch, or the people from the Netherlands, because two different words for two different things, but it's the only way they could drink the alcohol, because when they diluted it down, when they did the marriage with the water that was available, that water was pretty much putrid. Mm-hmm. So they masked it with juniper because they were great traders and they could get the juniper, and they thought, this makes this thing drinkable.
And for anyone who's complaining that juniper is too strong a flavor, well, now you know why.
So the alcohol made it potable, but it certainly didn't make it. It didn't open up the appetite.
Yeah, exactly.
But juniper made it drinkable. So it's those little tidbits of like anecdotes which I think are pretty cool about our industry, being one of the oldest. And listen, I'm sure you've already covered this in podcasts and stuff. Whiskey and brown spirits they're completely their own etymology and history and stuff like that. And I think it's fantastic. I've always loved brown spirits because of that.
Absolutely. And this thought just came to me too. Say the world's oldest profession is prostitution. I have heard more and more challenge that because, I mean, for talking honestly, it's probably true. But in terms of written records, at least, the oldest one's actually brewing. The oldest written record that we have is a receipt for buying beer from Mesopotamia. And I have seen it. I've seen the record firsthand. Couldn't tell you what it said because I don't read cuneiform. But the point being that that's the first record that we have. And we know the Egyptians 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago were drinking beer. They were getting paid in beer because the Nile
they were trading it, services and goods and services for it.
Right. Yeah. The people who built the pyramids were being paid in beer and bread because, one, who wouldn't want to be, but also because they were treated well, and you definitely couldn't drink the Nile because it's a very shallow river and not clean water because everyone's living right up against it. So you had to drink something that was, as you said, potable, not going to kill you, and enjoyable, give you a nice little buzz along the way.
And here's little me thinking, well, Patagonia is actually the last place on Earth. It's the last place that's been populated by humanity. If you look at the genetic history of our species, we left sort of the southern valleys of Africa, South Africa, and Namibia, those places. And we had a couple of immigrations out into Europe, and then sort of came back, and then went across Asia, and then either we went through the land bridge over Alaska and then south, or we went across by boat. That's still kind of debated. The amazing thing is that the last place we sort of came to pollute and screw up is Patagonia, and what I'm trying to say is that this journey of humanity to come down here, it never actually happened. Although we had been populating this up until about 12,000 years ago, which is a surprise because they thought they crossed the Alaskan land bridge, and you had the Puebla communities and stuff like that. It would be great to get the comments from people on this episode, if anyone corrects me if I'm wrong. But from what I understand, you have the whole Puebla and Clovis cultures in North America. Those are established, several thousand years ago. But actually in Patagonia, in a place called Pilauco, which happens to be where I first started making Trä-Kál, pure accident. Swear to God, pure accident. I rented out a little warehouse there, and I put my first 2 pots there. Pilauco, when I went there in 2016 to start making the thing, they actually discovered a petrified compound and footprints, human footprints from about 13,000 years ago, way earlier than people thought, had been populated. So much so because there was a disconnect between the populations in North and Central America and the people in the South. They thought these people are Polynesians that came from New Zealand across the Pacific. And Chile is fortunate. I almost said owns, but Chile is fortunate to count on its territory as Rapa Nui or Easter Island, with the famous Moabs and this, that, and the other. So we have our own Polynesian culture. But no one thought that there was like a land bridge, because there wasn't, because of the vast distances, like 6,000 kilometers from the coastline of South America. That people made it on rafts and boats and kayaks or whatever. Pilauco, the name Pilauco, is amazing because it's just like Trä-Kál, it's a compound name. Ko means water, Pilau means sacred. And it's where I started Trä-Kál that there's a natural spring, and there was megafauna there, okay, in those times, what they call the Quaternario, Georgie Quat, the Quaternario period, which is where you had the giant sloths and you had all these other large mammals. They would join up and meet there and go to Pilauco because of this natural spring. And humans settled near there so they could hunt them about 13,000 years ago. So even though we have that history, and I've gone off on a huge tangent, even though we have that history, none of the distillation never joined up, it never caught up. No one made the spirits down in this part of the world. So I guess my job was to make sure we caught up. That's what it was. And use local ingredients. And I swear to God, when I found that out after the fact, because there's some universities out from North America that have helped to understand all of this anthropological human activity there from 13,000 years ago. When we understood, this happened when I was just using the same water to make the first versions of Trä-Kál. If we have one thing that makes us different is that. And it's been so cool that the local people in the region where we are have really bought into it, and also the Chile bought into it. On our bottle, this is, but we're very proud of this. I don't know if you can see it, but maybe in a picture you'll be able to show it. All right, that says Chile. That's a marca Chile. We are an ambassador brand for the country. We've been nominated, and it seriously makes my hair stand on end that we were invited to be considered a marca Chile, like a Chile brand. So I guess being late to the party doesn't mean you're going to have a bad time, because now we've inspired a bunch of other people locally to start making spirits too. and there's some really interesting things happening. And the cool thing is that they're getting the message. The first few things that happened locally was people trying to make gin. Okay. But then they realize, you know what? It's actually where we are more of a pain to actually bring in the ingredients and make the gin. So they're using luma and melee and all these other unique flavors to flavor spirits. So this is like there's a lot going on here, and there's much more of a journey happening here. We're a small group of maybe 5 distillers, and we're all pretty crazy in what we're doing but we have no rules and we have no boundaries, and no one's telling us, oh no, this needs to be macerated for this long, or you can only use this type of wood, or this has to be done at this temperature. We're making it up as we go along, and we're having a lot of fun, and hopefully this gets translated for consumers, and they get to try new flavors.
I really think they should. And there's well, first I'm going to ask you about the name, but there's 2 questions after that are going to be really important in terms of how the consumer gets to enjoy this. So you mentioned the influence of the local indigenous cultures, the communities that you got to meet while you were backpacking and exploring this. And you were telling me a little bit about this before we started recording. So the name Trä-Kál, it's compound, as you said, but
yes,
go from there.
What does it mean? Well, it means well, sorry, I have a large dog. It doesn't mean I have a large dog. It means something else. Trä-Kál, as pronounced locally. It's 2 words. It's a phrase. Trä is courage, valor. Kál is an act. So together you can say it's an act of bravery. It's usually been used to describe the brave, the warrior brave. It doesn't mean the chieftain or the captain of the battalion or whatever. There's no hierarchical structure. It just means the guy that sticks his chest out, guy or girl. It's not at all gender-based. And remember, this is a matriarchal society. So it's whoever sticks their chest out and sort of goes forward and takes a leap of courage. I learned obviously this from the local people, so it was just like, oh, this is perfect. This is what the name should mean, because we're the first distillery in this part of the world doing our own thing. Not to say that we're brave or heroes. Like my old man jokes, he says, cemeteries are full of heroes. So you can't get too brave or too cocky. But that's what it means. It means moving the distillery to the ingredients. It means expanding the distiller's map. But I never had that much personally as founder. I didn't have that pharaonic sort of let's build a pyramid here kind of ambition. I just couldn't understand why no one was making booze here. I just saw that all the ingredients and all the character, all the stuff. I discovered it being here. I had already taken that leap of faith and of bravery. I personally had already sold my stuff. I'd moved away from the US. I'd been living in the US, and I wanted to do this. And I showed up with a couple of bags and actually spent the first few months sleeping away in a hutch somewhere and traveling and just trying to absorb all of this. That's what Trä-Kál means. It's that. It's the Patagonian spirit. In as much as a Patagonian spirit is also acting like a Trä-Kál warrior, because this is the land of pioneers. This was never conquered by any colonizing force. No Brits or no Spanish or no French or Portuguese was able to subdue the native indigenous nations here. They were all fought off. Actually, it was unfortunately due to disease and just proximity to Western lifestyles and Western people that ended up killing these off. but these are proud, brave, tough people. And then after a century or so, when you had people sort of leaving Europe, a lot of Germans and Italians and Spanish came here, mostly to the Argentine side, but some sort of crawled over the rock face of the Andes. They were also survivors, and the Patagonian spirit was to build from nothing, which is pretty hostile place. It's beautiful. It's it's a wealthy land in the sense that there's the rivers and lakes are full of fish and there's fruit and you can plant anything here and you'll be fine. But you got to work really hard. The weather, the connectivity, it's a pretty daunting place to try and eke out a living. And that's also what it means to us when we say Patagonian spirit. It's that sort of pioneering, make it on your own, and build beyond what you may benefit. That's the kind of thing, and I'm super proud and happy that some local people here, are inspired to make spirits. In fact, I'm working with a public university here, with people from the Ministry of Education, so we can encourage graduates, students at the local university level, um, uh, to become distillers and actually create a curriculum for distillation in this part of the world. Um, it's the economy here is, salmon farming and some dairy, and it's kind of a little bit of it. There's other parts which are actually more specifically where we are. But so the university, basically, people who do food sciences and stuff like that, they want to become food engineers or work in food production, the food industry, and this, that, and the other. They learn about salmon farming and dairy. There's nothing else. So we're trying to do that, which is feed off the popularity of the brand locally, and feed off the fact that it's kind of like a cool, fun industry, right? I'm not wrong when I say that, David.
No?
And that we get some young people to do that and learn about distilling. So we're building the curricula, and hopefully, for September 2024, we'll be able to do the first modules within the university courses, and who knows, maybe we get some people one day writing their thesis on distillation in this part of the world, which would be really cool. Really
that would be cool, yeah. And my first of the last two questions is about that distillation. But before I forget, there's also another point to be made there, and I really think it's important. Everything's been important, but I want to highlight this too. Despite the fact that I cannot get him to answer my emails, whiskey writer Dave Broom has been a big influence on how I think about things and how I think about whiskeys and spirits and where they come from. First with the way of whiskey from Japan, studying Japan, and then more recently a sense of place. And I think since I got the book A Sense of Place back in December, I don't know that I had heard that phrase very much before, but I felt like I heard it in almost every conversation after that when talking about a new spirit. The idea that it's not just terroir, it's not just what's local, it's also the people, the culture, the history going back, whether it's 50 years or 13,000 years, that led to what you're creating now. And the best distilleries, products, what have you, alcoholic or not, incorporate that into it. They incorporate the sense of place into the spirit and let the spirit speak for that place as well. How do I say it? It goes both ways for both parties. And I was, as a comparison too, I was also, again, I'm always thinking of comparisons. I was thinking of Isle of Rosse, fairly new distillery up in Scotland. It's an island that's about the size of Manhattan. It's almost identical in size and in shape, remarkably so. And it's got about 150 people on it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if you've ever been to Manhattan, you know it has a little bit more than that. So we can fit a few thousand people per train. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a little bit different. So the point being though that Isla Rosse Distillery went there and they wanted to form a distillery there, but rather than and they did the same kind of idea at Torabeg when they built this was
Mm-hmm.
don't just plop a distillery down there. It was you've got to work with the locals. If they don't know something, teach them. They can learn. Especially one of my favorite phrases: "Farmers are fixers." They can learn and fix problems better than almost anybody because they had to for thousands of years, and they still have to. And
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of just the culture being in some ways small enough for better or worse, but also concentrated enough where you can really imbue the spirit and the product with the cultures that you're working with.
David, what it is to build on what you're saying, it's a healthy culture. It's a
Yeah.
work-based culture. It's a culture that's proud of its traditions, that still values certain place names and stuff like that. My head of distillery, um, we built the pots together. We built the distillery together. He's a local guy, 10 years younger than me. Name is Daniel Vergara Levican. He is the archetype of the distiller that we're going to put through the university process. He's going to feed back everything that we learned together, because I don't think there's a better candidate in all of Chile, okay, uh, for to be a distiller. And his background was woodmaking. I hired his grandfather, who was an elderly gentleman, his company to build out some furniture and repair the roof of the first place I rented out in Pilauco. And after a few weeks where I saw him working, and I brought in the pots, which I had sort of built, the first prototypes I had built to my designs locally. Parenthesis, the reason it was local and I chose that place is because of the dairy industry, and you have people which are good at making sanitary welds and on stainless steel and stuff like that. They can build pots and stuff. So I told them, use the mix so you can join copper with stainless steel, and then here's a tube and that's the column and all that jazz. Well, I had built these things in the first initial designs, and then I needed someone to work with because I couldn't do everything.
Mm.
I told Danny, hey, let's work together. I like the way you work. You want to learn something new? And his answer was, I always want to learn something new. And like you said, farmers are problem solvers. Well, the people here, the roof leaks, go fix it. Do it yourself.
Right.
You don't call some service people to do it. And it's such a healthy thing. And for me, it's just been such a joy because I was a city guy. I didn't know about operational things and stuff like that. But I guess just like in an office where you start a new job, the first thing you can do is learn how to make the coffee. In a distillery, you need to know where your pots are going to be placed, and where the water's coming, and how you're gonna heat this thing. You start from the ground up. You start from the
Mm.
coffee machine. You start from the photocopier. You start from the ground up, and you problem solve, and it's amazing how you figure it out.
Sure.
If you're humble, if you're prepared to learn, and
Mm.
if you don't bring a lot of baggage with you. Um, and the people I found out here are amazing because they're like, they're excited to learn new things. And I just came up with an idea. I mean, everyone here has been drinking pisco beer and wine. It's not like, we're totally off the edge of the map, but it was like, you want to make what? From what? And what are essential oils? And you want to use tepa? Tepa stinks. Yeah, because the wood stinks, but the leaf is amazing. Making an essential oil, that's what gives you some kind of like a licoricey aniseedy kind of edge to the herbal profile, you want to use Depa. Yeah, I want to use the leaf. I don't know what the leaf tastes like. The wood stinks. All of these conversations were part of like the gestation process for Trä-Kál. It was so much fun, so much fun. Um, those 3 years before the first bottle came out, I genuinely were just the most fun, some of the most fun moments in my life. Not got a clue what we were doing, just beating metal. One of my pots, I lovingly call Frankenstein because it's got more patches and screws and bolts and and what we call chapa, just like patches. It looks like Frankenstein, but it works.
You
And
got to be careful with tradition there. Traditions to name stills after women, or at least female figures.
yeah, you're right. You're right. But this one, I guess I'll call her Mary Shelley after the girl that wrote the lady that wrote Stein, one of the
traditions
greatest
are
novels.
traditions are made to be broken. You're already making a spirit that had to get its own categorization. I think you can get away with having one still that's
called Frankenstein.
Right. But to that point, though, I did want to ask. You said earlier in springing it full circle, where you started off, you were working with Diageo on the commercial side than the production side, but you got to visit all these different places and different distilleries and breweries
Mm-hmm.
and wineries. Um, when you were really ideating Trä-Kál and thinking about what you wanted it to taste like, what you wanted it to be, um, having an idea in your head, but obviously not having produced it yet. When you're looking at the still types that you wanted to build, and the not only the individual stills, but the full, 3 still process there. 3 still, 5 still.
Three
I think
still.
it's three
There's
stills.
3 distillations. There's 2 large ones for the first distillation. There's 1 large one for the second distillation, and then there are 2 smaller ones, which are
Gotcha.
for the
Okay.
third distillation. Total of
So
5, 3 different.
gotcha. So, were they really like from scratch for what you wanted to create, or were there influences that you looked at and said, this is the kind of, maybe it was the mouthfeel from one distillery, or the way they got a particular flavor out of another distillery? Like, was there inspiration from there, or was it really from scratch?
No, I mean it was in one sense it was totally from scratch, because once you use the fruit and you decide this is the fruit that you're going to use, which is often, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. These are economic decisions, just like making beer is an economic decision, like making the first whiskeys or moonshines are economic decisions. Distillers, I've read it in many books. Distillers are economists. They're trying to find the right temperature to get the best runs, and get the most volume out and whatever. So you start from that, from the practicality of what you're doing with what you have around you. You can't be too exquisite and too artistic, not yet. Okay, so you start with what you have. Over time, it evolves. Ask any of my business partners and where I started out. The first versions of Trä-Kál were kind of strong. Were not as enjoyable as they are now. I put it down to the fact that we were a little, or at least I was a little immature in as much as a bunch of kids with their first garage band, they beat the drum too hard and they hit only power chords, and until they understand melody and they understand space and they understand timing and they understand volume, you don't really make a great song. You don't form a great band. And I never changed the recipe. I never changed the original ingredients, but I toned it down in the dosages and in the time of the distillation and also the evolution of the shapes to become more consistent in the production. Um, it's very difficult to explain, David. It's like you become obsessed. You're hyper focused on what you're trying to do, that you're making decisions all the time, you lose the plot. You know,
Sure.
it's actually counterproductive to come with there and say, "Oh, I'm going to make the best vodka or the best gin or the best this and the other," because you're just trying to figure it out. And the best thing you can do is just to say, "That's good. That's better than yesterday." Okay, what did I do? What was different? Did we write down what the temperature was and the relative humidity was on this day? Let's look at the spreadsheets. Keep information. Keep information. Keep information. That helps you cut out a lot of time.
Mhm.
But yeah, you really. I mean, if I were to say that I had some great grand plan or scheme or masterpiece I was going to build, I'd be lying to you. It was just like totally improvised, trying to figure it out. Danny and I doing a lot of head scratching. We set fire to a couple of places. It's what we were doing, you know. But one of the key things, actually, I think helps answer the question was my mother's input. My mother is a fantastic person, and she saw that I was toiling away trying to get different versions, and it was going one way or it was going on another way, and there was trying this herb and I was trying this other herb and this and the other. And it'd been about 2.5 years, and they were getting worried about me. It's like, this guy's gone off to the edge of the world, he's lost himself in his thing. um when are you going to stop, son? When do you know that you got it? She asked that question at the perfect time. I had different versions. I had gone in different directions. I was doing, I never changed the recipe, but I was like, you know, I needed a criteria. I need something to draw a box to say this is in the right, and this everything outside that box is in the wrong. So I thought about it for about 72 hours. It says, how will I know that I stopped designing and I can start producing? And I came up with two reasons. One, everyone likes it. Two, the local people recognize it. So if the local people recognize it and like it, and then everyone else, everywhere else, thinks, that's interesting, I like that, I'll take a chance. That's when I said, stop. And that's basically all I did. It just, that's how it came out the other side. All of this other stuff was just like place, water, fruit, the Huiche people, Chile, me, my background, Danny's input, where we were. Uh, all of those things went into a huge funnel, and then it was just focus, 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 focus. So okay, let's problem solve. Let's try and make the best we can. And then the timing of my mother's question was like, okay, what are we doing here? When do we stop? When everyone that tries it likes it, or at least the majority. Not everyone likes everything. We're not trying to be pizza here either, where everything is like cheese, bread, and sauce. But when people like it, and when local people like it and recognize what's in it, so it's going to be authentic. And that's it. That's when we stopped. We said, okay. The name came around pretty soon after that as well. We didn't have a name before we made the product. So, and that took about 3 years.
And here we are with a spirit that defies categorization. That's a new flavor that is incredibly versatile. I would also encourage people to not only taste it on its own, but check out the cocktail guide from the website.
Oh, website. Yeah.
Yeah, which has plays on classic cocktails. I mean, my favorites, Negronis, paper planes, things like that, but also handmade new cocktails, specifically made with Trä-Kál from some of the best bartenders, or at least most well-known bartenders. Can't claim they're the best because I don't know all of them, but certainly ones that I know the name.
Mm-hmm.
Mixologist uh, cocktailologists, whatever you want to call them, people who know their stuff in the industry, are in this guide making twists on their own cocktails, and which I think is something incredible, and it shows the inspiration that something brand new can bring to an industry. And it's wonderful just to read my
place in the world. David, thanks for saying that, because I'm not a cocktail maker. I mean, I would be foolhardy and arrogant to say I'm going to make a product that will make every bartender better. That's just like, that sounds ridiculous to me. So I'm not that guy. I know my place. My place is to try and make something that they'll find interesting, and it's one more color to add to their palate. It's one more something else. Just like they stand in front of a bar, they listen to the consumer is sending them obvious and also subliminal messages about what it is that they want, what will make them happy, what is it they need, what is it they're coming from. And these brains, these creative brains, are rifting like DJs into different directions and working off classics or inventing their own thing. I'm just a bottle with a story, with a flavor profile, and it doesn't come with any baggage either. So it's like, oh my God, you used an aquavit when you could have used a pear brandy. It's like, we're not part of that conversation.
Right.
We're just, you just use Trä-Kál, with all of its characteristics. You chose to use Trä-Kál, and it doesn't have any of that baggage. On the contrary, if you want to make a spin on a Negroni, a spin on a Paloma, on a Mojito or something, just want to knock it up in a different direction, Trä-Kál works well subbing out or split basing with other spirit categories. Far more than I could have ever imagined. Seriously. First time I mixed it with anything was with tonic. I guess my many years living in England, I couldn't get away from like a Gordon's and Schweppes, or Britvic. And I thought, oh my God, that's fantastic. But I had no idea some of the things that you could make. It makes an amazing Southside. It makes mules are amazing, great, fantastic. Pour into sangria and kick the sangria up a notch. Give it a whole herbal thing, especially if you're using citrus. Spritz were great too, because it's you see what it is? It's fruit based, but it's got citrusy type herbs as well as greeny herbs. And the tepa is kind of licoricey, sweet, but we sell Trä-Kál in Italy. I went to Italy and I did some classes and stuff with distributors, and they took me to some great places and to have meals. And they hit me over the head with grappa. I've always loved it, but unless you actually go and you get immersed into the whole grappa thing in Italy, you have no idea how incredible that spirit is. And they just absolutely loved it, because they have sambuca, which is licoricey, but very sweet. And then they have these grappas. And then Trä-Kál shows up. It's a much more subtle licoricey type, but the herbs are kind of like fennel for them. And fennel is so important for Italy and Italian food. Finocchio, they call it. Like, hell, that's what makes Italian sausage, the fact that they put fennel in it, So it's like, what the hell is this thing? And they love it. And they drink it straight. They tell me, I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't mix it because it is perfect. And then you make some Negroni. And they go, what? Because it's a lot less astringent than juniper, because it's fruit-based. There's none of that grain. There's none of that juniper sort of like mouthwashy type thing, which is, don't get me wrong, I love it. My favorite cocktail was always a Negroni. So it's like, but it's a different Negroni. It's a much more rounded, Negroni, much more naturally softer, not as bitter Negroni. So you give that to the Italians, and it's like, what did you do? You know? And I don't know. I didn't, I never made the first Negroni with Trä-Kál. Some bartender friend of mine, became a friend of mine after I moved to Chile. Said, well, let's make a Negroni. Let's make cocktails with gin and with Trä-Kál. Made a Negroni, sure. And immediately we're looking at each other going, wow. So have fun with it is all I can say.
That's a perfect way to end it. And for people in the US and many markets worldwide, but especially in the US, it is available from the website, direct shipping to you, easy to get. So, you don't have to go have some, you don't have to have a mule anywhere to get it, which is so nice once in a while.
Yes. Shop.trä-kál.com. Yeah. That's our
shop.trä-kál.com.
Yeah.
There will be a link in the show notes, of course, to social media as well. You can follow and to the main website as well. I will also post my tasting notes. You basically heard them if you listen to the podcast, but still, I'll post the notes and a little bit of the story there. The rest of it I'll leave for listeners. And in the meantime, Sebastian, hold on with me just for a moment after we close out. I hope you all enjoyed a little sojourn far south of the border, far south of the equator, to really explore something that, more than maybe anything else that we've tried in this podcast, is really unique and new. So thanks everyone for listening. Really appreciate it. And this has been another episode of the Whiskering Podcast. I'll see you all next week.
Thank you, guys and girls. Bye.
Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskering Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeyMyWeddingRing.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskering Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.